We are going to talk about my Setup Pro indicator, and we're going to talk about the settings and how you can configure it really quick. So my setup indicator, it's an indicator that lets you visualize your setup on the chart and see how it performs over time. That way you can tweak it, you can backtest it, see where it worked, where it failed, and once you're happy with it, now you can move forward by watching the setups form on the chart and decide to take the setup or not as they form. It can give you alerts when the setup is found, and you can visually see it on the chart. That way, you know exactly where to enter, where your stop is, and where your targets are. Now, looking at these settings, the first setting you want to pay attention to is that it shows setup in the bias direction only. So if the trend is moving higher, it will avoid showing you a bearish setups. You can turn this one off if you trade reversals after basically the price is moving down and it's against the trend type setup, but you need to add some confluences to make sure that works. The first section is defining a higher time frame condition. This is the reason for you to take a setup. What happens at a higher time frame that makes you assume there's a trade that needs to move in certain directions? For example, we can have a sweep of previous high and low. A one candle can sweep below the previous candle. And now we can say that's a condition that we want to look for trade going higher. We can have a sweep of previous high and low and a close above the body, not just sweep and close below it. For example, not this setup here, but that setup here because it closed above the open, the close. Or a sweep of any previous high and low. And this is a high time frame sweep of liquidity. So if you have some kind of market structure over here for a higher time frame, this one came below it and recovered. That's a sweep of previous liquidity. And on the creation of a new pivot, for example, on the close of this candle, now you have a structure shift. So now you can go higher. The next step becomes you define your setup entry. So once that condition is met, now you can look at where do you want to take your entry at, where is your stop, and the type of target you want to take. So you have a very long list of targets. So you can enter an order block, the levels of the order block, fair value gaps, inverted fair value gaps, breakers, and the unicorn. Same thing, you can have your stop loss based on specific type of PD arrays, order blocks, fair value gaps, inverted fair value gaps, breakers, unicorn, and the pivot point, which is the low or high. And your target can be based on a simple risk to reward, which means if your stop is 10 points, then your risk to rewards, you can go for 20, 40, and so forth. Or it could be based on projected level, and that's a fib level based on settings. And now it can go, for example, one extension, which is 1-to-1 based on the fib level, 2, 3, and 4. Now let's keep it risk to reward. And you can set up to 4 different targets. This allows you to set up, for example, I want to take my first partial at 1, second partial at 2, and if you need more, you can define more. Once that's found, it will highlight the entry to target criteria in that color, which is green. If it's not confirmed, just we know there's a setup there, but it did not confirm. The confluences did not meet the condition. They're going to show up in blue. The stop loss region is red, and you can see those here, green and red. We don't have a blue one here. And target levels, basically the lines coming across. Once you define your setup criteria, your entry and stop and targets, now you can specify some confluences. For example, even though a setup was found, I don't want to take this trade unless there is a fair value gap that formed after the order block. That will let it search only for that type of entries. For example, that disappeared, and now we have one here because there was a fair value gap formed here. And you get to define those type of settings. Now, there are a lot of more settings. Most of them are display related. However, you want to see these on the screen, the definition of your target. So if you want to have 5 measured move or 5.5, you can enable those. It will draw them on the chart. And the candle type display itself on the side. Now, At the bottom, you can define the times you take trades. For example, I only want to trade between 8:30 and 11 o'clock and afternoon session from 1:30 till 4 o'clock. That will let it only find trades during these times, not any other time. You can also define how do you want to map the candles. For example, if I am on the 15-minute, make sure the higher conditions are met on the 4-minute. If I'm on the 1 hour, look for the 1 day, 4 hour, look for 1 week, and so forth. And the very last is the alerts. So you can define different alerts. For example, you can have unconfirmed setup confirmation or trend reversal. And usually I set those two. What that means, if I want to be bullish, but the stock is moving down, I can say, just alert me whenever it changes direction. Once that happens, I get an alert, hey, now it turned bullish, go look for a bullish type setup. And I can come back to the desk, look at it, wait for a setup, for example. The other one is setup confirmation itself. Once the setup turns green, I'll get a notification that there's a setup, and now I can come in and take a trade. What you will see on the chart is the higher time frame. This is the 4 hour because I am on the 15-minute, and it will show me the candles that are forming, the levels that was swept, the fair value gaps, and the 4 hour order block. Now, this could be multiple candles. The indicator will combine them as a single candle. That way you can visually see where the low, the open, the MT of it, and see exactly what the order block looks like, even though it might be multiple candles on the chart itself. On the chart itself, you will see the actual setups that formed and where your entry would be, stop, and targets. For example, this is set for 3 hours with measured moves displayed on there. This will help you with multiple things. I can see those are, for example, bearish setups. If I have taken them, I can see I have in here 4 winning trades, 5 winning trades. However, how does this work over time? So if I come in here and say, show me the last 25 setups, if I configure this system that way, what would my setup look like? And it will look at different things backwards. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can see, for example, at 3 a.m., this gave me 1.5 only. This gave me 1 only. This worked during the regular trading hours. So you can start seeing where does your trades work and not work. If it's very large, do I want to take that trade? I may require a smaller size risk to reward, or take a smaller target, for example, and so forth. You'll be able to visually see what your setup would look like on the screen, what's the best time to take it, and refine your setups from there. So for example, if you look at these settings, you can come in here and say, well, let me look for fair value gap after an order block to take an entry. That way, maybe I can avoid some losses. And by doing that, you can see here, those went away. Those are stayed. This one got to 1, then got stopped out. This one worked. This one got stopped out, and so forth. So you'll be able to refine your criteria and figure out what's the best way to take a trade, when should you take it, and visually see it. Now, once you're fine and finalize your setup, it will give you an alert once the setup has formed, and you'll be able to come in and take a trade, for example. The other thing here is that you can act either on higher time frame candle close. So this candle would have swept this low, came back up, and you're waiting for this candle to close before the setup show up. That way, you know for a fact that a trade is valid, for example. This trade here is that one here, swept, came down. So that trade is valid after this candle closed. So right here, that became a valid trade. And you can wait for it or do a different type of entry criteria. It just depends on what you want. Or you can basically say, I don't want to wait for a higher time frame candle to close. Just give it to me live. And what that will do, the minute the candle crosses the other one and comes back above it, is going to trigger the logic and it will find you a setup. and you can make a decision if you want to trade it or not. Nothing changed here because we're saying find a fair value gap. Let's say if we turn this one off as required Confluence, and it will do a scan, and you can see here there was a trade. That's because this candle crossed above and came down, triggering the logic to say, based on that order block coming back in here. However, because the higher time frame did not close, it went through it and stopped it out. So you can come in here and say, for example, I want to have a confluence of having a fair value gap. Or you can say, I want to enter on a fair value gap close level, even without a confluence, because that will make it look for a fair value gap for entry. And if it finds a fair value gap, it will define your entry from that fair value gap to that stop loss. So that fair value gap right here to the pivot point, fair value gap to the pivot point, fair value gap pivot point, and avoided that loss right there. So you'll be able to configure the indicator however you like. And once a new setup is found, it's going to draw it right away. If you have alerts on, it's going to give you the alert. So that's my setup at a high level. It is designed to work with the ICT high time frame candles. It's my other indicator. And if you turn it on, that gives you more information. You'll see here some overlaps of settings. So you go into my setup and say hide the high time frame candles for my setup. That way you can use the other candles. And hide the overlay, but keep the PD arrays. So now you have more power if you're using both of them, because you have not only the 4-hour map to 15 minutes, but you can see that 1 hour doing is getting into an order block, 4-hour daily and weekly, and you can see exactly what they're doing. You also have the trend buys of each. So right now, if you come into 1 minute, we can see that 5-minute turned bearish because it dropped below an order block, but the 15-minute is still bullish. So right now, in 15 minutes, it did drop. However, it is testing a fair value gap on the 15-minute, and 15 minutes is bullish. But you are within 1 hour order block. So you need to make the right balance based on what's going on in higher time frame to find the right setup and avoid taking unnecessary risk. So that's it. If you want to know more about it, you can watch the deep dive video. Thank you.